Welcome back to Face the State. We will begin our discussion of state ballot question 1 with the side working to pass it. Jennifer Crowe with Nevadans for Background Checks and former Washoe County Sheriff Mike Haley are here now with that side of it. Thank you both so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, so Nevadans for Background Checks is the group pushing to have this passed. Tell me why, in general, you thought this was a necessary thing to have.
Well, as your package nicely explained, currently under Nevada law, background checks are only required at licensed dealers. So if you go to buy a gun at a gun store, whether it's a small business or a big box store, you go through a background check. But currently, thousands of guns are for sale through these online marketplaces, and no background checks are required. That just doesn't make sense, and it doesn't make our state safer.
What about the folks who say background checks in general are not going to keep guns out of the hands of criminals? If they want to get a gun, they're going to get it illegally anyway?
Well, no one law can prevent every crime, and we're not claiming that question 1 is the answer to the gun violence problem in our communities. But we do know that in states that have closed the background check loophole, they've seen a reduction in gun violence. There's 46% fewer women killed by their intimate partners with guns, 48% fewer law enforcement shot and killed in the line of duty. No one law can prevent every crime, but we do know that this will make a difference and that it will save lives. That's why we have the support of public safety officers all across the state.
Now, Nevada is traditionally a state that doesn't like more government oversight. Nevadans, like to keep their freedoms open and as little government as possible. Why is that something that you feel comfortable kind of tinkering with in this case?
Well, nothing about question 1 infringes on the rights of law-abiding gun owners. And I think maybe Mike can speak a little bit more to the issue of that. But in terms of public safety, we know that this will help reduce gun violence. We know that it will make a difference. And to say that we should do nothing really doesn't make any sense, particularly when we have this inequity in the law. We don't apply our laws in only certain places. Our laws apply all the time to everybody. And the background check law should be no different.
How do you know that it will make the state safer? Because the opposition's arguing that it's not going to make a difference.
Well, the research shows that in states that close the loophole, there's reductions like I outlined. I mean, you can't deny that it's going to be harder for people to get guns if background checks are required on more gun sales. In 2013, Colorado closed the background check loophole. In the first to 18 months after that, more than 14,000 new background checks were conducted on private sales as a result of that law, and it blocked almost 200 gun sales to prohibited purchasers. These are felons, domestic abusers, fugitive. These are dangerous people that we have all agreed in our current laws should not have guns, and we need to close the loophole so that we can enforce those current laws.
Now, Mike, you're a former law enforcement officer. What have you seen in your experience that would indicate that background checks are going to have an effect?
Well, we have background checks in the state of Nevada now, federal background checks that are required when we all go purchase a weapon at a firearms dealer. And we know that criminals go to those firearms dealers to buy weapons. Over 5,000 of them have done that in the recent calculations. And if we expand background checks to include all sales of weapons, then we will capture more people, felons, fugitives, people with mental health disorders, domestic batterers. Those folks who are the only folks we're trying to prevent having a weapon from having them, those folks will be caught in this process and prohibited and prevented from accessing those weapons.
Is there concern, though, that it would just grow the black market, that they would then go underground to look for guns?
Let me speak to the black market. The true black market are street corners where you have to know where those corners are. You would have to go research to find out where you could maybe buy an illegal weapon. We have undercover officers doing that. And they're not always very successful because it's very tough to find illegal weapons on the street. Where we have the wholesale sale of weapons now is online sales. That's not black market, it's legal. But there's two people make a deal to buy a weapon, and they meet it in some parking lot. and the seller doesn't know that the buyer isn't prohibited at all. And they should know, and they would know if they went to a gun dealer and had their backgrounds checked. They'd be safe. They knew that they would know they're not selling it to a prohibited person that may use that gun in a way that would cause harm.
Now, given that standpoint, I'm sorry, Jennifer, given that standpoint, why is it, do you think, that the majority of our local law enforcement leaders here in Northern Nevada are in opposition to this?
Well, you know, before I joined in support of question 1, I researched it. I spoke with the public. The public supports this. I'm a public servant. I've researched it, I've read about it, I believe that it's the best law. I don't think, as Jennifer said, we can have 2 ways that we can purchase a weapon here. It's confusing. And everyone that I speak with tells me that they're astounded that we have 2 ways to buy a weapon here. So I have respect for my fellow law enforcement professionals, but I can tell you in one op-ed that was written, that particular professional had not read question 1 at all. And so before I ever decided to support this, I read it. I know it's a good law. I know it's a good initiative. I know it will be a good law. I know it'll save lives, and I know it's the right thing to do.
Now, one sticking point might be that it's going to allow these people who are going to be running the background checks, the federally licensed dealers, to charge what you're calling a reasonable fee. Mm-hmm. There's no definition to what that range is in the measure. So how do people know that they're not going to be charging an arm and a leg for this?
Well, in other states that have passed this law, the marketplace typically will determine the fee, what people are willing to pay, and nobody's going to charge more than people are willing to pay because it's actually a tool to bring more people into your store. We've seen that in other states. On average, they cost between $10 and $20. It's a very minimal fee. Background checks are quick and easy. Most are completed within just a couple of minutes, and 97% of Nevadans live within 10 miles of a licensed gun dealer. So it's not really an inconvenience. And to highlight something that the sheriff said about the online marketplace, we know that in Nevada in any given year, over 35,000 unique gun ads are placed on these online websites. We also know that 1 in 11 people shopping online for guns is a prohibited purchaser. So just looking at that research and statistics, we know that thousands of guns are being sold unwittingly by these sellers every year to people who shouldn't have them under our current laws.
Now, I want to touch on the word inconvenience, which you just said. I think inconvenience is subjective, obviously, and I think when it comes to sales, it's one argument. But the other part of this measure is when it comes to temporary transfers, so basically loaning your gun. And it would make it substantially more difficult for a person to, say, loan their gun to their best friend of 20 years to go on a hunting trip. That would no longer be legal, and I think some people might see that as an undue burden on their rights as Americans.
Well, you know, the law, or the proposed ballot measure, does have reasonable exceptions for family hunting and self-defense. The family-to-family transfer definition in this law is one of the broadest in the nations to really sort of respect that libertarian gun-owning Second Amendment tradition that's very strong here in our state. Hunting as well, as long as you know you're out hunting together, sharing guns, that no background check is required. Now, if you're going to loan your gun to somebody and you're not going to go with them, then you want to make sure that they, under the law, are allowed to have it. And you don't always know that. A background check protects everybody so that we know that we're following the law and enforcing our laws that we currently have.
Okay, we have about a minute left. So what's your closing message? What's the one thing you want voters to take away from this?
Well, from my perspective, I would like people just to take a minute to read the initiative, to read it, and to compare that about what's being said relative to the opposition. When I read both of those, or I read it and I look at the message being sent by the opposition, I think I'm talking about 2 different issues. I think it's reasonable, it's responsible that we prohibit people who should not have access to weapons, not to have access to weapons. It'll make a safer region. It's the best thing we can do, and children and women will not be killed by folks who are prohibited from having weapons.
Okay, Jennifer?
You know, just to sort of sum it up, I think, you know, this is about saving lives. I think a lot of the discussion is getting distracted in some of these other conversations about convenience or, you know, I can't go hunting with my friend and it's going to be some sort of hassle or whatever. But when we come down to it, you know, when you meet with the victims or the family victims of gun violence, a background check is a simple thing that we can all do to save somebody's life.
Okay, well, thank you so much both for your time. I really
Thank
do
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, coming up on Face the State, we will hear from the other side of the issue. Stay with us.